Greetings. Welcome to a special edition of the Steve Deace Show here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. And folks, this could very well be among the most special of special editions we have ever done. But first, a word from our friends at Voice of Judah Israel. Their mission statement is what Paul says in Romans. The Apostle Paul declares, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." Well, right now in the nation of Israel, there's about 9 million people, 6.5 million of them Jews, who don't know and don't believe in their Messiah, Jesus. And so what Voice of Judah Israel does is they bring the hands and feet of the gospel by serving the charitable and material needs of the people of Israel, but they also do so by the preaching and teaching of the Word of God as well. If you want to partner with this messianic ministry to bring the gospel back home to the place that gave it to the rest of the world, go to vojisrael.org. vojisrael.org/Steve is where you can go. That's VOJ for Voice of Judah, vojisrael.org/Steve. Once again, head over there today. This could be the great harvest that Paul talks about right now. vojisrael.org/Steve. When I met my wife 30 years ago, it'll be 30 years ago this November that I met the former Amy Ramsey, who would go on to become wife and mother of my children. And when it was clear to her that she had interest in me, she knew that two of my great passions were Michigan football and athletics, which she comes from a family of Michigan Wolverine aficionados and alums. So she was already inculcated into that at birth. So there was no adjustment needed there for her, but also conservative politics. And so she thought, where can I go? I'm an Army brat. Certainly we have opinions, but in our household, we weren't to air them. My dad took the oath very seriously as a member of the 101st Airborne. I rarely, even when he became my father-in-law for the next 20 years, I rarely heard Bob, when he was still alive, issue a political opinion, even to his deathbed. Every now, if he really pissed him off, he would, and Obama did a couple of times. Not gonna lie, but short of that, he was, stars and stripes forever. He took that oath to his grave for the most part. And so she was aware of politics, but not really well versed in it. And she thought, where can I go to understand this other passion of this young man that I am interested in? And so she went to two places, to a book called The Way Things Ought to Be, and its follow-up, See, I Told You So, because she knew that those were the two books written by someone who, in my life at the time, frankly, was as constant as the North Star. One of the heritage radio stations for none other than the late, great Rush Limbaugh was News Radio 1040 WHO. They actually signed up with Rush on his very first day on the air in August of 1988. They were a heritage radio station. And it was in June of 2006 that I would take over Afternoon Drive on that show, and I will never forget the first day walking in to do that show. And I walk in and get prepped to do my very first program ever on June 12th, 2006, making the transition from sports talk to news talk, similar to Rush making a transition from sports to news, and airing right. It was surreal for me. Airing right there in the speakers in the studio overhead as I was getting ready to prepare my show was Rush Limbaugh. I was coming on after him. And the reality is, without Rush, none of us in this thing called conservative media, whatever it is now, none of us have our phony baloney jobs. It is very rare for someone to be singularly, preeminently great at something. It is even more rare for that exact same person to spawn an entire cottage industry parallel economy on the basis of his own accomplishments and exploits. It has been 4 years since Rush passed away. But his legacy, of course, still remains. And one of the ways that it lives on is with someone I'm proud enough to call a friend, his brother, David Limbaugh, who is joining us today for this very special edition of the Steve Deace Show as we look back on a legacy unlike any other with Mr. Limbaugh himself, David, who's no slouch either. He is the author of multiple best-selling books, several of which we have featured on our show over the years. So, David, it is a true honor to have you join us. I know you don't do this a lot, so appreciate the special dispensation. And I've always appreciated the fact you agreed to write the foreword to my very first wide release book, Rules for Patriots, as well. You've just been a good sounding board and a buddy of mine over the last few years. And so I've really been looking forward to this. Thank you for the time today, brother. How are you?
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on.
I want to start back to front with this conversation today. And not really, I want to have it towards the end, we'll get into, your upbringing and how you knew. I want to start at the finish line, because you and I both take our faith very seriously, and it's the spirit of the age that says it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Wrong. It's all about the destination. It's all about the destination. You figure out as a man, what's the destination I want? What do I want said about me on my deathbed? What do I want my kids and grandkids and family members to say about me at my funeral? What do I want my Lord to say to me when I enter into eternity? And then you work your way back from there. So let's start with legacy. As you sit and just even contemplate everything that your brother helped to spawn and inspire, I just want to ask it as an open-ended question. What immediately comes to mind?
About the legacy he inspired, You're saying? Well, I'd have to say what you said. I'd have to double down on what you said, that he created a cottage industry. He actually created a genre of talk radio, conservative talk, and he had done this after honing his skills throughout his life and with many trials and tribulations. And he did what he wanted to do. His legacy, personal legacy, in my opinion, is overcoming all challenges that were placed in his way because he had a passion, an irrepressible passion to do what he wanted to do. And he fought through it, and he finally succeeded in a big way to become the best best in the world at what he did, which was radio broadcasting and conservative talk, and in any talk. And I think by doing that, he opened the floodgates to people who would imitate what he was doing, who admired what he was doing, who wanted to set themselves apart through their own talents, and were able to do so because he blazed the path for them. And I just think, like you say, a lot of people recognize that, which is gratifying to me. And he was always appreciative of the fact that it occurred, and he was gratified by that. And so I think it was a life well lived in that sense, in the professional sense, a life well lived. And the things that you talk about, his legacy, if you could see my X feed, Twitter feed, Facebook page, emails and texts, you wouldn't believe the warmth that comes my way from his fans, who I consider a family. And by, derivatively, I'm part of their family too. They're so loving and respectful and warm. And it never fails. It's every day. Every time I tweet something, somebody will, especially after the election, because they knew Rush, I think, was instrumental in Trump's rise and ultimate victory. And this victory, by the way, that's a big part of his legacy. I think without Rush, you may not have Trump. Now, I don't know. I don't want to be presumptuous and take anything away from Trump. I just think he opened the path for what has ultimately come to be here. And we've forged a new coalition. It really is a new day in America, a golden age possibly, and we're all excited. But Rush really was the kind of person that believed in what he was doing and was going to see it to the end. And even through doubts with my father was hoping he'd become a lawyer or do something more conventional, and he didn't want to do it. He refused. He knew what he wanted to do. And so he ultimately triumphed. And I think the whole country, as a result, benefited from what he did. Now, the people that receive me with warmth or greet me with warmth on Twitter, and every time I tweet something, it doesn't make me jealous. It makes me happy. It makes me proud to that people recognize his accomplishments and what he was and what he meant. And they wish he were still around to enjoy it and to celebrate it and to pontificate on it. I do get a lot of hate tweets, but since I block most of those, I really don't see many of them anymore. And they don't bother me because I know the left is so hateful anyway. It's not like I take it personally. But the bottom line is he created not just success in the industry and influenced politics. In that interview I did with Newt, that he talked about how the 1994 class made Rush, congressional class, first time Republicans won Congress in 40 years, made him an honorary member. And that's kind of emblematic of what Rush did, what he accomplished in life. That was the first phase of it. And then on through, anytime people could, anytime people wanted to know what true north was in a conservative sense, they could turn him on. And there was a certain feel too that I particularly noticed now that he's gone. There's a void for 3 hours a day where I used to go and like I was home, I could feel comfortable, not just because he was my brother, but there was just a soothing, calming, a voice of optimism and stability when he was on. And people have lost that and they feel it palpably. And nobody's irreplaceable. And he's set up such a legacy that people are going on and people are thriving. You are among them. And so I'm not suggesting that he's superhuman, but he was very important to the movement and therefore very important ultimately to the country. And I don't think that's overstating it, especially considering what a precarious situation this country has been in the last 4 years.
I'll never forget the day. This is before my current staff, Todd and Aaron, were working for me. My phone starts blowing up one day, and I was relatively new over in national syndication with Salem Radio, and my phone starts blowing up about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's because your brother is reading a column of mine from he doesn't know who I am, so it's Steve Deace over at Town Hall. And my I mean, I've already been involved in presidential campaigns. I've been on national TV. My phone, I'd never received the level of feedback on anything I'd done in my entire career as I had that particular day when he read that piece. And the amount of trust that it takes to build it with an audience for them to essentially react that way. And here's the thing too. You can't ever lose that. If you lose that, you never get it back, right? It takes years to build that, and then if you waste it, you never get it back. For him to maintain that, David, all the way to the end with his audience, how was he able to do that until the very end?
I guess because he was never play acting. It was sincere. Everything he did was sincere. Now, of course, he did gags and comedic things and all that, but he was so passionate about what he did, so loved broadcasting, so loved interacting with his audience. And he did understand his audience, I think, better than any host I've ever been around, and I've been around a lot, because he knew that he had a bond with them. And this really came to light. It crystallized for me when I noticed that he, ahead of many others, saw something in Trump, particularly the attraction he had with his audience and the bond that he forged with his audience. And Rush would say, there's only one person who can break the bond that Trump has with his audience, and that is Trump himself. Because no amount of third-party attacks are going to influence that. And that turned out to be prescient, but it wasn't as prescient as it was a kind of a projection, kind of an association that he had from his personal experience. He knew that Trump had the same kind of attractiveness to his audience, to his fans, to his voters that he did as a host. And so he knew, since he saw that, and few people saw that as early as he did, he knew what Trump could ultimately mean. And he stood for him way before I did. And I remember you and I were both for Ted Cruz in the primaries. And I didn't think I wasn't convinced Trump was conservative yet. And by the way, I'm not sure he was yet. I think Trump had a metamorphosis sometime during the primaries, and he'd always thought the New York liberals were the good guys. And then when they started slinging their arrows at him, and the Christians and conservatives started defending him, he finally realized who the good guys actually were. And then he began to adopt their policies, which he probably would have believed instinctively anyway, except for a few issues. And so it was a natural transition. It was not a phony transition. And while I think I might have been legitimate to be skeptical at first, he totally earned my trust as he went along. And Rush, I think, saw something in him that I did not, I'm ashamed to say, early on, but I quickly did after the primaries were on. There was no question once he was running against Hillary that I was all in, and I became a big admirer and supporter of his. So I'm just saying Rush was ahead of the game, was ahead of the curve on that, and there's a distinct parallel between his audience loyalty to him and Trump's fans' loyalty to Trump. And so I just think that's remarkable.
As I sit here in my 50s now, I find myself on a regular basis praying to finish well. And unfortunately, we see a lot of men don't finish well. And I did go back and listen to the interview that you did with Newt Gingrich a few years ago, which I think is one of the only times you've done this kind of a retrospective before. And you talked briefly about how Rush finished well, and faith was a key element in that equation for him at the end. Can you go into more detail on that for our audience here, David?
Yeah, and I, by the way, in some of these answers, I'm inevitably going to talk about myself because my life was intertwined with him, but
sure.
But I don't want it to be. It's nothing about me. I'm apologizing, going to make sure you understand this is not from a narcissistic perspective. But I was a doubter. We grew up in a Christian family and went to a Methodist church, and for some reason it didn't sit well with me. I always believed in God. I even remember asking my dad when I was 13 outside of church why Leonid Brezhnev and the communist rulers in the Soviet Union didn't believe in God, because I was incredulous that anybody could not believe in God. So I never had that issue, but I didn't really accept Christ. I didn't know anything about him, really didn't know anything about the Bible, even though I'd gone to Sunday school and confirmation and all that stuff. I just didn't pay attention, I guess. And it wasn't until I was in college I was always trying to learn about it. By the time I got in college, I really started seeking and studied everything I could, apologetics books and all that. And I could name them, but it's not about me. But the point I'm making is I always had those doubts, and I overcame them through study and all that, the intellectual doubts, or what I thought were. But Rush, when I asked him later, he said he never had any intellectual doubts about Jesus Christ. Now, being the Son of God and being God. I don't think he was into it, though. I don't think he really accepted Christ as his Savior. I don't know, early on, I mean, and that evolved later. But I think he intellectually believed it, and he tried to live by those values. We all failed. But he believed in the biblical values. And so throughout the years, when I was doubtful as to whether he was actually a believer, not because he said he wasn't, but because I just was a little skeptical about whether he embraced the faith enough and let it be a part of his life and thought about it enough and actually trusted in Christ. So I would start to witness to him in little ways, and especially when my first Christian book came out. And he promoted the heck out of it and was really unbelievable, as were so many others. But I didn't think he got engaged, but I kept doing things. Like one time I was studying the book of Acts, and I asked him if he would like to participate. I was doing it with my daughter by online because she was already out of the house. And I asked him if he wanted me to send him copies of the emails I was sending to her as studies. And he really embraced it. It wasn't like he said, okay, I'm going to pretend to care about this. He really embraced it and thanked me and was grateful and read them and would ask me questions about it and all that. And so I knew he had a deep interest, and it continued to grow. But and who knows what's in someone's heart. But I will tell you this, that in the last few years, and especially after his diagnosis the last year, he totally accepted Christ. He talked about it openly. He talked about how he prayed every day. He actually talked to God 24 hours a day, like we're supposed to. Well, he knew his death was impending, and of course that's pretty sobering. And so he talked about how, to me and on the air, how he had an ongoing conversation with God, and he seemed to be at peace. And I don't know if you realize it, because you're busy, you have your own shows, and I don't know how much you listened in the last year, but he really was optimistic, and he wasn't fatalistic, and he wasn't negative about his own impending death. And he knew he was going to die. He showed me pictures, because one day I said, how are you feeling? And we were not a real demonstrative family where everybody's hugging and all that. My parents, the World War II generation, the greatest generation, they were not real handsy and all that, although there was never any question of all of us loving each other. But he became, when I asked him how he was feeling, he said, frankly, David, terrible. I can't remember the word he said, but it was worse than terrible. And so he sent me a picture, and I would never expose this, but sent me a picture of the back of his legs, his calves. They were beet red from the chemo. He was in some kind of a targeted treatment. It was a great thing. It just turned out that it didn't work for him, because he was among the 1% that qualified for it, but he was also among the 1% of those that did qualify that it didn't work well. And so he suffered so much physically during that period, during the last year of his life, that it is a tribute to his fortitude and his commitment to his audience, his commitment to the country, that he powered through and kept doing it. Because you cannot believe how badly he felt every day physically. I don't think he had a good day after pretty much right after the diagnosis. Of course, I think he might have been in denial, because he was in stage 4 at the time he was diagnosed, and he had put it off. He didn't go to doctors very often, and Catherine told me that he was all out of breath. He couldn't even, when he got off the plane to go to some vacation they were on, I think it was a Christmas vacation, maybe in Las Vegas. They were up in the room in the suite, and she was telling me how he couldn't even walk, and he was experiencing that and still didn't go to the doctor. So finally she made him go to the doctor, and of course it was too late. It had spread, but he was kind of stoic that way, and he endured pain. But I just want to say that the way he fought cancer, and the way he insisted on doing what he does and staying true to the audience was just an inspiration and remarkable to me. And he became very close to Christ during those years, so that I have no question that he of where his eternal destiny is. And so whether I was right about him not being into it earlier, it's irrelevant, as we all know. If you finally accept Christ and trust him as your Savior, that's all that matters. And he did, for sure, the last few years.
As you think back on his final show, what comes to mind?
Oh, man. I can't go back and listen to it. I can't. In fact, I don't think that I've gone back and listened to any of his former recordings, audio or video, because that does make me sad. And so I can't stand. Truthfully, I'm not sure whether the last show or the Christmas show, where it was almost like he knew it was going to be, I think more than almost, his last show. And it was particularly emotional because he just had a sense. But I don't think he knew the day of his last show that it was his last show, because he was headed up to Boston for another treatment. And it wasn't until he got to Boston that Catherine told me that it was not looking good, that I should come down and meet them. And 2 weeks later, he was gone. But I remember after it happened, I called, surreptitiously called my friend Sean Hannity, because his show followed Rush's. And I told him, I said, I just giving him a heads up that don't say anything about this until it's public. But I wanted you to know, because I don't want you to get kicked in the teeth while you're on the air. And I might have called Mark Levin, who was close to him too. So, but other than that, I was kind of quiet about it. And then it came out. I think Catherine went on his show and said it. But we were down there at their house in Palm Beach to the very end, and it was he lasted way longer than he was supposed to, and it was kind of brutal to see that. But I mean, he was conscious, but he he really couldn't do much, and he couldn't communicate. So it was not good. I mean, he could communicate a little, but it wasn't good. So it was painful to see that, but I wouldn't have missed it, of course. But anyway, that's the last show. I don't even remember how I felt. I may not. I think I had a sense, but I don't. I think it was more earlier than, not the last show, but pretty close to the last show, that I had a stronger feeling about it.
We've got about 3 minutes in this first segment, David. Can you just walk our audience through what the initial amount of accolades, sympathies, condolences that you and your family just experienced in the immediate aftermath of his passing, given the legacy that he left behind?
I would bet, you'll probably think this is an exaggeration, I would bet I got tens of thousands of communications from texts, emails, and social media and calls. In fact, DMs on Twitter or on X. The other day I went back, I needed to direct message someone on X. And I knew that we had communicated before. So I searched their name and I found them. And then when I was back on the date that we had communicated, I saw a flurry, I mean, an amazing amount of messages that I had missed. And I was embarrassed about it. And so many people, Facebook, I'd gone back later, not just Twitter, but texts. I totally missed texts, never answered them. And of course, I would have almost been impossible. It would have been impossible to answer them all. But I still felt bad because they were so heartfelt, and they weren't just one-liners. They were how much he meant to them and all that, and it just how devastated they were, and how the country's going to suffer for his loss, and then of course extending their condolences to me and the family. But it was remarkable, and I that retrospective and looking at these messages that I'd missed, because I don't know that I would even have time to read them, much less respond. In fact, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have. And plus, I was in no mood to at the time anyway. But it was overwhelming. You would not believe it. Really, you wouldn't.
I've got about a minute here. Do you remember who the most surprising one was that you received? That you're like, I did not see that one coming at all.
No, I don't remember. I could think about it and probably come up with it. But most people, I mean, I knew most of the people that, or they wouldn't have had access to me. But the people on Twitter, I mean, a lot of people were jealous of him. A lot of people in the conservative movement, which has always been disappointing to me, were jealous. But most people were just overwhelmingly positive, and so I don't think I was hit by any surprises. If I was, I don't remember now.
Folks, first, though, a word about our friends over at Preborn, the outstanding pro-life ministry we've been proud to partner with here for the last few years at The Blaze. That partnership has saved tens of thousands of babies. In the history of their ministry, Preborn has saved hundreds of thousands of babies, and they do it with the biblical model of persuasion. There's truth and then there's grace. First, a mom is confronted with the truth that being in her body is another person. She hears that heartbeat with the ultrasound, and then hopefully she is convicted in her conscience to now keep her baby. And then that's when the grace comes in, and prenatal care, postnatal care, all kinds of assistance is there for the mom as well. All of the things I just talked about, by the way, they're all free, but none of them are actually free. And that's where we come in. If you want to make a tax-deductible donation today, and so many of you have been generous, let's keep it going. Go to preborn.com/Steve. That's preborn.com/Steve, or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby on your mobile phone. David Limbaugh is our guest on this special edition of the Steve Deace Show, looking back at the incredible legacy of his brother Rush Limbaugh, basically the forerunner of much of what we know and understand today about conservative media. And the fact is, much of it wouldn't exist without him. So I wanted to make sure we started by honoring his legacy. But now we're going to look back on individual impacts that he had. And when did David know, hey, he's got something here? We'll get into that and more when we come back. Stay tuned.
The Steve Deace Show.
All right, back here on a special edition of the Steve Deace Show, looking back at the incredible legacy of the one and only Rush Limbaugh, without whom things like the Blaze, frankly, don't exist. And just as our tour guide, no one's better equipped to do this than his brother, David Limbaugh, who, of course, has produced an incredible amount of noteworthy content for conservatism and Christianity in and of himself. And just to demonstrate, just again, in my own personal background, the kind of impact Rush had on all of our trajectories. I got into national media because a group of successful businessmen came to me after seeing the historic effort we had in Iowa when we became the first state ever to get rid of state Supreme Court justices via retention election. And I had a group of businessmen come to me and say, hey, don't have any delusions of adequacy, kid. We're not saying that you're equipped to strap this dude's sandals, but we kind of got the idea of doing this by seeing what happened with Rush Limbaugh. We saw that, a successful businessman or two saw this guy out in Sacramento, California, and thought that it's a market about the size of Des Moines, and thought that he had some ability to go even further than this. And so, we gave him the resources to go out to New York and see what happened. And that's exactly what happened with me. Now, I didn't start on WABC. It was Salem's New York radio station instead. But again, there's just no way to be successful in this business on any level or movement, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's a little bit of both. There's just no way to do that without retreading some of what Rush Limbaugh terraformed, because he was a living, breathing proof of concept, and his influence is going to be felt for generations. So we're going to do the best over the course of this 2-hour show with David to give it what it deserves. But before we continue on with the conversation, let's stop right now and make sure we're all prepared. And I know what you're thinking. That could never happen here. That's what I thought too. And then I saw what happened in Western Carolina, and I finally called up my Patriot Supply and said, you know what, now I'm not just a pitch man, I'm a customer. I'm in. And I had them hook me up with the 3-month emergency food kit right now. You can get that, over 2,000 calories that you need each day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, even drinks and snacks, just in case you're the next that could never happen here that happens here. All right. Get prepared right now with a special discount, $100 off. And if you order by 3 p.m. today, it'll be shipped within the same day and for free. All right, the big discount and the free shipping when you go to preparewithdace.com. Make sure you've got that peace of mind just in case. Just in case. Go to preparewithdace.com. Again, once again, head over to preparewithdace.com. So we started at the end, David. Let's now retrace our steps, brother. When did you first know, hey, I think my brother's got something here? When did you first realize it?
Well, we were very young, and he always gravitated to the microphone, so to speak. When we watched baseball games, with Harry Carey being the broadcaster for the St. Louis Cardinals, Rush would turn down the radio or TV, and he would substitute his own voice, and he would call the show. But he was also very, he was kind of gifted, while he wasn't into academics. He was so brilliant. I remember when we were like, I was 2 or whatever, and he was 4, he could identify every car on the road. And it was almost like God told him he had no way to learn those. So how did he know? And I later marveled at that. He actually knew, and he knew about aviation because my dad was a World War II fighter pilot, and Rush just inhaled things about aviation. Anything he was interested in, he could learn like nobody I've ever seen. He wasn't interested in some things that people that like he was not interested in becoming a lawyer. So that had nothing for him. So he wasn't going to do that. But he learned about aviation, baseball, and like I said, he could identify cars with an uncanny ability, and everything he was interested in, and there were a broad spectrum of things. He became an instant expert, as witnessed by in later in life when he became an Apple product enthusiast. He learned so much about Apple products that he could have been a technician without the formal training. But so I knew when he started doing those broadcasts that he had a talent. Now, there's no way I could have projected or could have imagined that he would end up being a host of a show yet. But later, we started listening to the radio and listening to rock music and pop music, there was a guy named Larry Lujak. He was a DJ, I think, at WLS, which was the big 50,000 watt station in Chicago that we received because it was such a powerful station. I don't know if it's Skip or what allows you to hear those kind of stations on an AM band when you're that far away. We're a 6-hour drive from Chicago, and we still received it. And he started idolizing these talk show hosts, these DJs, and so he would start emulating them. And he even, I used to make fun of him because he had this radio voice that he was trying to hone, and it was phony. I mean, it was totally fake. So I'm making fun of him. You know, I can't even do it. My voice sucks so much. I'm not even going to try to imitate it. But he had all the tools in his voice, and he could imitate anybody. And so it was great. And he started doing all that. And we were younger. He had this Rimco Caravel, which is a blue machine that allowed you, a little machine toy that allowed you to broadcast on the AM band in your house. And so my mom, who was always so supportive of my brother's pursuits, even back then, would have us listen. We'd listen on one floor while he was broadcasting on the other. And really, you know, of course, who am I? I'm not old enough to be a good judge, but his talent was unmistakable. And as we got into high school, I had a different set of friends. I was 2 years younger, but Rush was not really, you didn't ask me this, but it's just coming out kind of organically. Wasn't really that popular, wasn't really that social, because I think he was shy and didn't get into it. He became a DJ on KGMO, a local station, when he was 15 and a half. He got his radio license in Dallas. He always had a passion for radio. And so he started working in the radio station, got his afternoons off, and didn't have to go to school. It was a double win for him. He got to do radio, and he didn't have to go to school. But he developed some popularity. That it's not that he was a nerd or unlikable. It's just that he was not that social early on. But when he would go on the air, there's my dog. There's my dog trying to get it.
I thought that's what that was.
And there she is. Oh my gosh. Oh,
it's all right. We're dog friendly here, so don't worry about it. It's all good.
Looks like he's taking his dog out at the moment. This is a fascinating conversation. I cannot wait for folks to hear this as we're taping this.
Yes.
Ahead of time.
While we're taking a bit of a dog break, thoughts so far?
Takes me back.
I know.
It really takes me back. I mean, 88 it starts. I did not listen to him. I knew of him, but in high school. I graduated in 1990. And Rush comes on my radar as it applies to me being a student at the University of Wisconsin and the Democrat presidential primary, because Bill Clinton, Paul Tsongas, and Jerry Brown were on the University of Wisconsin campus a lot. And Rush made everything about this fun.
Yes.
That's politics more than anything else. I mean, we knew of other people who could talk about it smartly. He was clearly smart, but it was fun. You wanted to be part of the game.
Do we have David back?
We do indeed.
All right. Pick up where you left off there. That's all right. Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, not sorry. But so he was on that local station and just thrived. Everybody. And the reason I mentioned I think he was voluntarily unpopular, not unpopular, just wasn't really a socialite like I was in high school, just, all over the place. But the reason I mention this is it ties into his talents. He was a different person when he was on the radio. So happy, unbelievably happy, and unbelievably gregarious and outgoing, and his kind of overcame his shyness while he was on the air. Not that he ever considered his shyness an issue, nor that we did. But I remember when I'm probably a sophomore in high school and he's a senior or maybe a junior, and these guys in the class ahead of him adopted him. They started coming over to his house because we had a neighbor John Russler, who was a year older than him, 3 years older than I, and he came over, and then he ends up bringing all his friends, and they just marveled at Rush, how funny he was, and they do these skits on these, what were they, 8-track, not 8-track, what are those tape recorders that they have the big reels
Yeah,
on?
the reel-to-reels. Yeah.
Reel.
Yeah.
And my mom, and so they did sophisticated shows where they would make fun of a teacher, in a high school teacher, and they would have sound effects and unbelievable. I mean, it was so sophisticated, and they were so mischievous that Rush later burned him. He was embarrassed. It's such a tragic thing, because I would give anything to have those. Because if you would hear those, okay, I know this guy is a genius, because he totally was. And so he became instantly popular with all those guys who totally appreciated him. And so that was a change in his social life, because he finally parlayed, not intentionally, but it just happened. His skills led to him meeting so many new friends, and it was a change in life for him. And I thought that was awesome, how people started to appreciate him for what he was and the talent he had. He was just ahead of the game. He wasn't interested in being social. He always, like I said, I keep repeating this, knew what he wanted to do. So he was, I mean, there was never a time when I didn't recognize his talent. By the way, and I don't know if, I'm sure people that listened to him understood this, he could imitate people like an impressionist, like Rich Little, or so many people can do this now, but he had an uncanny ability to do it. And so that was hilarious too, because some of the skits that he would do, it wasn't just that he could imitate their voice, it was the hilarious things he said he put in their mouths as he was doing it. And so those kind of things led me to believe he could really, really do what he wanted to do in that industry. But as I've said to other people, if you asked me whether I thought that he would become a superstar, I candidly would say no, I had no idea.
Which little brother, by the way, name me the little brother who thinks his older brother is going to become a superstar.
Yeah.
That has never happened all throughout human history. So you are not unique where that is concerned.
Not at all. But not only that, but he what he was doing was so unorthodox that, at least for our family, that I didn't think he would ever have an avenue for it. Professional avenue, never thought about it that much. I was too busy.
It didn't exist. There was no reason to think of it. It did not exist. He invented it, literally. It didn't exist.
No, exactly. So that's what happened. But as I was telling someone else, if I had known that such a genre would open up, or that he would open it up, then yeah, of course, I never doubted his talent. That I could not have foreseen how his career ended up. No way.
You get the call one day, and he says, I'm going from Sacramento to New York City. I'm making a very big jump here. Normally in radio, there's a jump between a Sacramento and a New York City, and he's going to make it all at once, maybe multiple jumps between those two places. He's going to make it more than one, all at once. Your reaction initially was what?
Oh man, I was ecstatic. I was excited because my brother is going to make the big time. That was just now. You see, though, I have to say, when he went to Sacramento in 1984, I had no idea, although I did help him with a legal contract at his request, I did not have any idea that he would even be successful there, because he hadn't been. He'd been fired 7 times, and he'd always pushed the buttons. He always did what he wanted to do. He was irreverent, and he was irreverent because he knew that he was good at what he did, and that if he had played by the rules, strictly by the rules, he never would have been recognized. So he kept pushing the envelope. And finally, the people in Sacramento, I think, allowed him a little bit of liberty. And some have said it's because they were focusing on the morning drive guy. And so Rush kind of quietly snuck up on him, and he started getting ratings. And then as his ratings increased, they gave him more liberty to do what he was going to do, because they saw what he was doing was succeeding. And so that 4-year period from 1984 to 1988, he really developed and refined his skills. And he was really doing the same kind of a show there, other than the fact that he was flavoring it with local news as well, and Sacramento news as well as national news, that he would ultimately take to New York for a syndicated show. But I remember one time he invited me out there because I think that he knew that I didn't realize just how much he was thriving in his element out there. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to show me. He never vocalized that, never verbalized that. So I went out there, spent a few days with him. And remember, I went to a Lions Club meeting with him, luncheon with him. He had been invited to be the keynote speaker at the Lions Club, obviously because he was a local celebrity, which I didn't know. Rush never really bragged about it to us. So I go out there and I witness it firsthand. I'm listening to him speak. I am unbelievably blown away by his talent. Now, when I say, I said a minute ago that I'd never doubted his talent, but I did not know that he was the orator, that he was the public speaker, the raconteur that he became, that he ultimately had evolved into. And he had them in the palm of his hand. And if I were the jealous type as a sibling, I would have been devastated. He was so good, but I wasn't. I mean, honestly, I have a million faults, but that's not one of them. And I was ecstatic for him, and I was blown away. I was surprised at how good he was. So while I said I understood his talent, I didn't know it was that far-reaching, and I didn't know it was in the long form where he could speak and no notes, never. I mean, not one single note, and never did he lose his place. Never did he lose the structure in his mind, which, by the way, I think was organic. I don't think he had a structure. I think his structure developed as he talked, which is an incredible gift. I mean, you know that. I think you're the same way. I don't think you use that many notes.
No.
But not many people can do that. I know I can't do it. I'm so, my mind is all over the place, as witnessed in this interview. I can't do that. So somebody said, why don't you go do a talk show like Rush? Well, in the first place, it would be stupid. I'd be compared to Rush. Even if I were almost as good, it would be stupid. It'd be humiliating. It'd be a betrayal. But the second thing is, I couldn't do it. I mean, I'm not that good at it. I'm good in spurts, and I'm a better writer than I'm a speaker. But I can speak okay, but I get off track too much, and that doesn't work in your profession.
No.
And so I realized that about myself. At least I got a little bit of self-awareness. But anyway, going out, watching what he did just blew me away. And so when he got the call to go to New York, no, I really wasn't. I mean, I'm surprised in the sense that it doesn't happen to people. But I did not have one doubt that he would kick butt once he got out there. And I even told Ed McLaughlin, who was the guy that recognized him, I'll tell you when we get back from the break.
See, he knew. He heard the music. He knows. He's been around the radio biz a little bit. David Limbaugh is our guest here for a special edition of the Steve Deace Show, looking back on the legacy of the late, great Rush Limbaugh, his older brother. We'll come back. We've got one final segment with David, and we will get to it here in a moment. All right, we're back here with Hour 2 of a special edition of the Steve Deace Show here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast alongside Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. You can let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. Email us there, steve@stevedeace.com, DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X, Instagram, and TikTok. And then also please subscribe to our new YouTube channel at Deace Show on YouTube. That's at Deace Show on YouTube, where we had to start all over because we told you too much truth the last few years. We got too many strikes, so we are starting from scratch there. So if you can please help us, we would appreciate you getting our numbers up there at Deace Show on YouTube. If you love the podcast version, please leave us a 5-star review. Now, if you're like, I don't like it at all, we'd never ask you to lie, so don't do that. If you just kind of like it, though, we would totally ask you to exaggerate. All right, so we only like to see 1- and 5-star reviews. Please feel free to add yours. Thanks to all of you that have done that for us, too. And then hit subscribe, or if you're on iTunes, follow, and that will assure that every time we do one of these new episodes, it shows up there, right there in your podcast feed each and every time. But, folks, if you're looking for some cool swag, before we continue this outstanding conversation, don't forget to shop over at Blaze Media. In fact, that's the website. ShopBlazeMedia.com is where you can go, because if you like this show, you're going to love the merchandise we have for this show and all the shows right here at the Blaze as well. From Truth Be Told hoodies and sweatshirts to the Steve Deace Icon polos, the Pro-Life Hero mug, and more. All this available to you right now if you go to ShopBlazeMedia.com, all one word. Everything from the Blaze Heritage and Blaze Media collections, jackets, t t-shirts, socks, mugs, and more. ShopBlazeMedia.com. Use the code Steve10 when you're there. Use the code Steve10 when you're there for 10% off. Do it today. ShopBlazeMedia.com is where you can go. And if you use the code Steve10, you'll get a discount not just on our stuff, but all the stuff from all the shows that you get at ShopBlazeMedia.com. Use code Steve10 for 10% off at ShopBlazeMedia.com. And our guest here today for this very special edition of the Steve Deace Show, the brother of the late, great Rush Limbaugh, David Limbaugh himself, a multiple-time best-selling author as well. And so, David, when we left off with you at the end of the last hour, we were talking about when did you know? You get the call from that you were on the precipice of something really unforeseen in the history of American broadcasting, and then the jump all the way to New York and from Sacramento, and that's kind of where we left off with you at the end of the last hour. You're welcome to just pick it up from there, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, Ed McLaughlin was an ABC executive, and he had experience in radio. And for some reason, they allowed him to. He had bartered some deal where he was allowed to have 56 stations. Because he was driving through Sacramento, or someone had told him about Rush, and he listened. He thought, this guy is amazing. I'm going to syndicate him right off the bat, sight unseen. And so Rush told me about that and asked me to come out and help him with the legal work. And as I've said, that really melted my heart, because although I always loved contract law, I hadn't done it any more than an ordinary general practitioner in a small town would have, and I didn't know much about the broadcast industry.
So your very first one is going to be literally the most important contract perhaps in the history of American individual broadcasting.
Yeah, it's like I'm way out over my skis,
Yeah.
But it was because he trusted me, and that's such an important thing when you do choose a lawyer or a doctor. And one fun thing about being a lawyer is you get to learn a lot about the industry of the people and the businesses of the people that you represent. So in that case, that was my beginning, and I got to learn so much about the broadcast industry. And we used to, before we went, I met with Ed and talked to him, and I said, Rush is going to be a phenomenal success. I'm so appreciative that you recognize that, but I'm telling you, it's going to even be bigger than you think it is. And I knew, and I was pretty bullish and bragging about it, and that was also part of the negotiation too, a little bit. But it was something, and Ed was very gracious and all that, and so we go out there, and I went out there to Sacramento and prepared the contract and worked with Ed McLaughlin's New York lawyer, Howard Abrahams. It turns out he was a really good guy, kind of intimidating at first because he's a New York lawyer, and what am I but a Midwest guy? And so it was cool getting that experience. So Rush goes out there, and he had to do 4 hours. That was part of the deal to get cleared, meaning that the WABC, the flagship station of his syndication, would run his show. And this is the biggest radio station probably in the country, one of the biggest, one of the most popular, and they were putting him on there. Think about that, to do his national station. But in exchange, they got him to do a 2-hour free local show. So not only was it difficult for him to go and begin a nationally syndicated show and do 2 hours, he had to give 2 more hours, and he had to split his prep time between learning local New York news and national news. But like I said, he had a steel trap mind, such a quick study, such a fast reader, that he would just absorb stuff, and it was effortless for him. It was hard work, but he loved it. He was in his element. And so to answer your question, once I saw his success in Sacramento, I had no doubt. I didn't know he would be plucked out of Sacramento, but once I knew how good he was, and then Ed chose him, I knew that he was destined for greatness. And so when he first came on, when his first show was aired, and I'm in our hometown still, Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and I had the radio. I'm telling you, I got goosebumps. It was like when you listen to patriotic music, like during the Trumps and all, how excited you feel. I just blown away, and I was just so proud. And I'm driving around town hoping people knew that he was my brother. Of course, they knew. So I live in a small town. We all know each other. But so I was pretty cool just by association. I thought that was a big moment for me. It is about me, after all. Yeah, it is. Now that I think.
You mentioned one of the great radio stations in American history, WABC, one of their former executives, a guy we probably mutually know named Phil Boyce. And Phil was very instrumental in promoting me when I was at Salem. And one of the pieces, so I mean, there's a group of people I would not be where I'm at without them, and he's one of them. And one of the pieces of advice that he gave me early on in our relationship is he said, you mentioned Sean Hannity. He said, Sean had 9/11. He was on the ground there at 9/11, providing a perspective no one else had. And he said, Mark Levin, involved in the Clinton impeachment and his perspective where that's concerned, that no one else owned that space. And he said to me, those are the kinds of the things that launched those two guys' careers. And he said, for you, that space, Steve, is no one else has the access to the presidential cycle that you do living there in Iowa. And so I took that to heart and made the Iowa caucuses a big part of our show. And I wonder for your brother, was there, because I remember, when I first got to hear of Rush Limbaugh was during the House banking scandal. I was very active in politics in high school and college Republicans, all that stuff. But where I first heard about Rush Limbaugh was during the House banking scandal, which almost seems trite by the stuff that we have going on today. So was there a galvanizing populist moment like 9/11 was for Hannity and the Clinton impeachment was for the great one, Mark Levin? Was there that moment where this went beyond just, are you already an aficionado of this kind of broadcasting, to something that now is going to penetrate the normie population?
Well, I don't think there was any one specific thing. I think I didn't mention this, but our dad was an amazingly gifted person, speaker, thinker, debater, national debate college champion when he was in college, and small college, but really brilliant lawyer, brilliant debater, and all that stuff, and absorbed by politics, fascinated by politics, way more than anybody else I knew in my town. Nobody. I mean, now with social media, all of us are ensconced in all this. We're all over. Mm-hmm. My dad was in it, but way before anybody. And people used to come over to our house in high school and listen to him pontificate. I mean, most people were hanging around with girls. Well, we actually were later in the night, but we could sit around our living room, and all my friends, imagine them wanting to hang around with my dad. And that was true of Rush's friends and my friends. And they just listened to him pontificate. It was as if as a microcosm of what Rush would ultimately be. My dad could hold court with anyone. I had one fellow lawyer one time, older than me, younger than my dad, say if he ever had to go on a slow boat to China, the person he would take to entertain him was my dad, because he was so fascinating and so knowledgeable about a lot of things, but especially politics and the Constitution and America's founding and history. And so Rush got that from my dad. Now, but interestingly, my dad wasn't particularly funny any more than the ordinary person. My mom was a stand-up comic type, and we got it from her side of the family. And Rush combined those two things. I mean, it was like a perfect storm of good things for him, of good genes that he got all of my dad's talents and all of my mom's the good talents that would serve him in the industry that he ended up in. And so I think the what really galvanized him to some extent was the fight for the House majority, as Newt Gingrich talked about, mm-hmm. and the battles with Clinton throughout. I mean, he was Clinton's nemesis, and Clinton would call him out by name. Clinton was haunted by Rush.
I remember,
because he was his watchdog. And so I think the constant battle, didn't they try to, pardon me, Dave,
didn't they try to kind of kiss up to him? Because the Clintons had, if I recall, this Hollywood TV producer duo, married duo, were some of their best friends, right? And they had a TV show. And didn't they put Rush on as a guest star at one point? Was that kind of their attempt to kind of try to smoosh him a little bit and kiss up to him a little bit at the time?
I never knew that the causal connection there. The Clintons involved. In fact, I remember it was the Hearts of Fire, or maybe it was, wait a minute, Marky Post was on the show.
Yeah, because that was Billy Bob Thornton's very first starring role, I believe, was that TV series at the time, if I remember right. Yeah.
And there was Linda Bloodworth Thomason was from Poplar Bluff.
Yeah.
It's about 70 minutes from us, Howard Drive. And she was fascinated by him. And I even had the feeling that Clinton was going to be mad at her, mad at him promoting. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not privy to everything. So if you heard something, I won't deny it. I don't. Maybe Clinton was second, but I kind of doubt it. But he might have been. But anyway, it was an interesting thing. And so Rush, despite the fact that he was demonized, and this is something that you haven't asked me, but it kills me. People don't realize that Rush was the tip of the spear. And while now I think Trump has now suffered way more than even Rush did for the movement, but nobody had ever experienced the kind of abuse, the focused abuse that Rush took, because he was the tip of the spear for conservatism, because the mainstream media, as you know, had a liberal monolith. That there was no conservative media out there to speak of. And Rush came on, people started listening and saying, wow, you got to listen to this guy. He thinks exactly like I do. Well, we didn't even know. A lot of people didn't know. They thought they were in the rank minority. By the way, history repeats itself. I think you and I would agree. We were beginning to think, notwithstanding we really felt the election was stolen, but we had no idea how discredited wokeism was, and DEI, and the transgender stuff, and the border. We had no idea. We're not only, in fact, I think, truth be told, the Democrats totally cheated even in the last election. Truth be told, we probably have a 60% majority now that you have. I don't mean it's ever going to translate into votes that way. I don't know. But now that you see what Trump is doing, now that you see all this positivity and all this leadership that he's exhibiting, and so fast, it's now okay to become a conservative. It's now okay to admit you're a conservative, and you're going to see a lot more blacks, a lot more Hispanics. There's already been a watershed. There's going to be more, and I see a parallel with that with Rush, because when he first started, people didn't know, and that was part of the attraction. I can't believe somebody's got a national platform saying the things that I believe, and finally contradicting the lies and the deceit and the insane liberal ideology that we hear on our news every day. So that was a big part, I think, of what happened with Rush, and I think that was some amazing development in the history, in our little micro history of America. His impact on the media, and how that would ultimately translate into his popularity. So not any particularly one event, but I think it evolved, because the answer I was going to give is that he had such an instinct for politics and our founding, despite the fact that he didn't have a college degree. He was an autodidact, and he studied all this stuff, and we sat at my dad's my dad's feet, listening to my dad, and instilling us with all this knowledge. And Rush was able to parlay that into his show, and I think people really appreciated it and benefited by it. So I think he was unique in how informed he was, and his political insight. I mentioned this too, that he used to joke that he could see the stitches on a fastball, and while that was kind of like when he was bragging, it was mostly just fluff, and he's pretend bragging. He wasn't arrogant or conceited like he pretended to be, but it was part of the bluster and all that. But truthfully, he could see the stitches on a fastball. He had an amazing ability to analyze current events like no one I've ever seen before or since. He had unique insights. When you listen to his show, you weren't going to hear some rehash of what somebody else would say, what somebody else had said. He always had a unique take on things. And I think that is what led him, in addition to the force of his personality and his talents and his humor and all that. But boy, I just think that his analytical ability was the most underrated of all his attributes.
We talked earlier about a real personal faith happened for him late in life. Yet you don't have the level of success he had without challenges, obstacles, adversity.
Oh, I thought you meant me.
No, I mean he literally is a broadcaster who lost his hearing. I remember the ordeal with ESPN and what they did to him there, and the smear job that happened to him when they brought him onto the NFL Game Day show. And those are just a couple of examples. What during that period of time, what was the secret to his tenacity, to his drive? because he's already made all the money you can make, right? He's living, a life most men would only dream of living. Okay, so what was the source of that perseverance during those moments, Dave?
Well, there's another one, Sandra Fluck.
Oh, yes. Yes.
He was almost forced to apologize internally for that, and he really resented it because he didn't really do what they accused him. What he did was no big deal. I mean, he said the word slut, unfortunately, but you're basically paying her to do whatever, and so but that was a traumatic time for him. But he was so confident in what he was doing, and he was kind of righteously indignant about when people would accuse him of doing things that he hadn't done, and of holding beliefs that he didn't have. Imagine Elon Musk being accused so deceitfully of doing the Nazi salute when he was just emoting with his audience. And that's the kind of crap that Rush dealt with for 20 years or more. And nobody was there to defend him. He had to defend himself because nobody else had the platform to. Now, later, Hannity and a lot of people would defend him. But I'm saying that at the time some of these things occurred, he was a lone man on an island. And what enabled him to do it, I think, was that he believed in what he was doing. And he believed that what he was doing transcended the arrows that he was taking. And I don't know that he even thought about it that much and analyzed it. I'm going to stay in here even though it's tough. He just plowed forth and did it. And so he grinded it out, hard work, determination, passion, commitment to what he believed. And so he persevered, and I think it showed. And so he was like a one-man army. And I'm not trying to understate the amount of support he got from the different people that partnered with him, and from me and other people who were his friends and his audience. But as far as publicly, it seemed like he was out there on an island by himself, defending himself. And it was pretty amazing to watch. And we've all been beneficiaries of his perseverance.
We've got about 10 minutes left with you, David. Let's talk maybe about some things you got to see that the rest of us did not. What were some of the moments where you saw Rush maybe hold court with people of great intellect, dignitaries, renown? Here's a guy who, didn't want to spend from Cape Girardeau, that didn't want to spend one more day in a classroom that he absolutely had to. Did you get a chance to experience some of those kinds of moments behind the scenes?
There was one time when Justice Clarence Thomas came to our hometown. My cousin, my uncle, and a lot were both federal judges, and I can't remember the reason that Justice Thomas came. And I think it was to speak at the university, but we had a private dinner at my cousin Steve's house, and he was a federal judge, and Clarence Thomas was there, and some other lawyers, local lawyers, and other people. And Rush pretty much, no, I got this wrong. It was Justice Scalia. That's what it was. And Rush and Scalia were talking back and forth. And while the rest of us would chime in a little bit, it was pretty much just a dialogue between those two. And the rest of us were just marveling at it. And it was just fascinating. The reason I said Clarence Thomas slipped on that is because they were such close friends. And so he had an ongoing dialogue with Clarence Thomas and was great friends with him to this day. But it was the Scalia thing. But Rush would interact with Newt Gingrich and with President Bush when my mom, George W. Bush, when my mom had been diagnosed with metastatic lung cancer as well, smoked for 50 years, and she got cancer. And during the first Bush campaign, I think it was, yeah, and because it was 2000, close to, he came to Cape Girardeau to visit my brother, who was, George Bush came to visit my brother, to talk to my brother, because that's how important Rush was to the conservative movement, to Republican candidates, that George Bush made a special effort to come to Girardeau because Rush was here to visit my mom. So I didn't go over to the house at the time. We got pictures of it. I did see George Bush later on that trip, but Rush and Bush talked at my mom's house and about the campaign that would go forward. So that was another example. But Rush was sought out. I mean, Netanyahu, all the people, they knew what influence he had, and they knew that he was a heavyweight and was an intellectual force to be reckoned with. So there are all kinds of those situations that occurred through the years, and I have to think about it. Needless to say, he was not sought out by Bill Clinton or Barack Obama.
I want to take you, before we go, I would be remiss if I did not bring this moment up. February 2020 State of the Union address. And President Trump calls out your brother for the Medal of Freedom. Just take us back to that moment and what that was like.
Well, you know, Donald Trump is nothing if not unorthodox and kind of funny. And I got a call the day that Rush was going to be awarded that honor. Trump called me. Probably Sean Hannity gave him my number. It's not like I'm on his hotline list, but he called me and started talking about Rush and that he was going to give him that award and that he didn't know it. He didn't know why he was in D.C., but he finally told him. He finally later told him that he called him and he was actually getting treatments, as I recall. Was he in Boston getting a treatment? And Rush said he really couldn't do it. And Trump said in his way, he goes, "Look, you're starting chemo. You're going to look like I won't say the word in a few weeks. You better do it now while you still look okay." And so Rush didn't have anything to wear. Like, he's always wearing gym shorts, even in cold weather. So they got him clothes and tux, whatever he wore. And Catherine and he flew out there and he was awarded. And oh, that was big. That was so big for me too, and for all of our family, for Rush to get awarded. And I'm telling you, this was an award that was heartfelt by Rush. It wasn't just one of these things where you've done me a favor, so I'm going to pay you a favor back. Trump really thought through that award and gave it to Rush because he thought he earned it. And because after all, while the left doesn't agree even with our definition of liberty, obviously, or democracy or anything else, constitutional republic, Rush was an instrumental driving force in the preservation and perpetuation and survival of individual liberty in the United States. So when you think about it, what the name, that the purpose of that award, it recognizes people who have advanced freedom and liberty. Who more than Rush has done that in the last 30, other than political figures, Reagan and everybody, and Trump, but for the position he was in and the influence he had on promoting conservative values, which are ultimately ideas that promote individual liberty and responsibility. I don't think anyone deserved it more. And so he believed that it was heartfelt from Trump and that the audience was going to receive it, even though the left would hate it and did hate it and mocked it. So it was a special moment to watch that. And you can watch the tape of that and see how emotional he was, because he knew he was in deep trouble medically, physically. And this was going to be one of his last hurrahs. And it was a crowning achievement, I think, regardless of how the left thinks it was politicized. I don't regard it as political. I thought it was an award well earned for a lifetime of achievement and something that really was so paramount. His influence was so paramount to the country. So it was emotional for me as I watched it. I didn't go. And it was amazing. It was amazing for all of us.
Before we continue on with this conversation, allow me a little self-indulgence, because soon we're going to be giving you more details about the top secret project I was working on for much of last year called Richie Meets the Rainbow. If you are looking once and for all to prove that the old Irish Catholic saying was correct, what the devil hates the most is to be mocked, that is the goal of this project, to do some truly divinely inspired mockery. If you want to get on the list to learn more soon about this project, all you need to do is go to richiemeetstherrainbow.com. Richie, R-I-C-H-I-E, richiemeetstherrainbow.com. The goal is to do the ultimate takedown of Pride Month, and it's long overdue. You know me, go big or go home, right? richiemeetstherrainbow.com. Go there, sign up today to make sure you get updates on this project coming soon. richiemeetstherrainbow.com. We're down to our final 3 minutes here, and I think maybe the two greatest compliments that anybody that does this for a living can get is, hey, you made me stay in my car or stop what I was doing to finish hearing what you had to say. Or the personal investment and that relationship between the broadcaster and the listener is so deep that you feel good when they have success. And I remember feeling that way when I was much younger, when I tuned into the ABC News nightly news one night and saw at the very end they gave a shout out to Dan's Bake Sale and how huge of an event Dan's Bake Sale was. And if you're an OG Ditto head, you know what Dan's Bake Sale was. Okay, we don't have time to rehash it, but when I saw that moment cross over, I felt great pride as a Rush Limbaugh listener. Like, hey man, this thing is really growing, taking over. We've got 2 minutes left. I just want to yield to you the balance of time here to take it to say whatever needs to be said and maybe something I didn't ask, David.
One thing I thought you were going to say that one of the greatest compliments that you could have as a broadcaster is somebody say that you have a talent like Rush Limbaugh. And I'll just pay you a compliment that before I knew about you, someone told me, you ought to hear Steve Deace. He's like the Rush Limbaugh, the new Rush Limbaugh out there. He's amazing. Not that you broadcast the same way, but they meant that you had a lot of talent. And so I listen, and I totally agree how talented you are. I just want to throw that in there for your edification, for your benefit, and I'm telling the truth about that.
I don't know what to say to that other than thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And so what I'll say is that I am extremely proud of my brother. And so I am grateful that you gave me an opportunity to share a little bit. I haven't done that much. I've been asked to do it a lot. I didn't really want to do it closer to the time he died, but he meant the world to me, and you cannot believe how generous, I should say, generous he was to me, my family, to other people throughout his life. The things he did for people anonymously, an anonymous giver. He would do so many favors for people. He really had a heart of gold. He struggled so much in that last year. He lived his whole life doing what he wanted to do, evidenced by the fact that he didn't quit. He didn't quit until he absolutely was forced to quit, no matter how bad he felt. And what he did, I don't think it's possible we would be where we are now with this new dawning golden age of the country without the work of my brother. So thanks so much for allowing me to share.
Amen to every word, brother. And it's been a pleasure. God bless you, David. We'll do this again soon, all right? Take care. Thank you for the honor. We'll come back and wrap it up here in a moment. Stay tuned.
The Steve Deace Show.
Well, now is the time during the special edition long-form interviews where we talk about the subject we just interviewed behind their back. Although this one's kind of unique because we interviewed somebody about somebody else. But not just any somebody else, somebody who literally changed the course of a medium, of an industry, of a country. And, you could just hear a very proud younger brother who, it should not go unsaid yet again, guys, has sold probably in the millions of books. Okay. So, David Limbaugh is one of the most successful authors in the history of conservative publishing. And I just can't even imagine what kind of an honor it is for an older brother to, after he's gone, have his younger brother eager to speak of his exploits without feeling threatened that his own are maybe not getting the limelight that they deserve. I think it also speaks uniquely to their relationship and uniquely to the legacy of the one and only Rush Limbaugh. But folks, if you're looking for some cool swag, before we continue this outstanding conversation, don't forget to shop over at Blaze Media. In fact, that's the website. ShopBlazeMedia.com is where you can go, because if you like this show, you're going to love the merchandise we have for this show and all the shows right here at The Blaze as well. From Truth Be Told hoodies and sweatshirts to the Steve Deace Icon polos, the Pro-Life Hero mug, and more. All this available to you right now if you go to ShopBlazeMedia.com, all one word. Everything from the Blaze Heritage and Blaze Media collections, jackets, t-shirts, socks, mugs, and more. ShopBlazeMedia.com. Use the code STEVE10 when you're there. Use the code STEVE10 when you're there for 10% off. Do it today. ShopBlazeMedia.com is where you can go. And if you use the code STEVE10, you'll get a discount not just on our stuff, but all the stuff from all the shows that you get at ShopBlazeMedia.com. Use code STEVE10 for 10% off at ShopBlazeMedia.com. So Todd and Aaron, as is custom, you guys have sat here for the last hour and a half just vicariously experiencing this as the audience does and listening in. Your thoughts?
It's amazing that that time was all spent and there was hardly a word directly. Everything was tangential about politics, which is instructive. And it goes back to what I said briefly when we were when the dog came stage left.
Yes.
Like, he made it fun. Steve, one of your fundamental laments, as long as you've been doing this, about the GOP is about how, basically, translate, they're just a bunch of stiff hacks. Mm-hmm. I sent you a I don't know when people listen to this, but it was on another topic and it was related to Trump. It was John Hamm, and he's a Republican, but not a little bleep. You know?
Yes.
That's
not another word for wimp that means female dog. Yes.
The party is just exhausting that way. Just like, I don't want to... I agree.
Mitch McConnell and Ukraine's the most serious thing we've ever had.
I hear the words coming out of your mouth. I agree with the principles, but I can't stand you. You suck, really. And
this would be great if it weren't for you.
Exactly.
Yes.
And yeah, a lot of people hated Rush too, but not because he sucked. It's because he was just so damn good and have his fun at it.
He's the embodiment of the Irish Catholic saying, what the devil hates the most is to be mocked. I mean, I can still quote Paul Shanklin parodies from 30 years ago like they were yesterday.
Now, the second thing I would say is I listened to him a lot during the first half of his career. Not so much for some various reasons. One of them having to do with what you always told me. Once you get into this business, you don't spend a lot of time listening to anybody else, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
Yep.
But there's two people I associate with him. The first one I already mentioned. He's intimately associated with that, to me, the 1992, it would have been 91 at the time, the Democrat presidential primary. So he's forever attached to Clinton and impeachment. But learned a lot about him as well through John McCain. Because after 8 years of Clinton, you kind of thought you could, it's a Republican, it's a Democrat. You start to take Rush's talent for granted. The fact that he was as principled as he was about not just glossing any and all Republican and just going shirts and skins kind of thing. John McCain ultimately had to loathe Rush Limbaugh just as much as Bill Clinton did, because he would not.
I'm John McCain. Yes. I remember his John McCain impersonation.
He would, and
I'm very important, and I'm John McCain.
He would not.
Was McCain the little ball of hate, or was that Cheney?
No, that was McCain. The little ball of hate. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's it was fascinating to listen at that time because he made, and this is what you've always done, and another similarity. I don't work for you. You work for me. I'm going to make you work for this political candidate. I'm not here to just, work for you for free and blow smoke. No, that's not how it's going to go. And you can resent that all you want, and obviously McCain did, and it didn't make him a better candidate, and it certainly never made him president of the United States. So I have more to say. I want to give Aaron his chance because it's going to be fascinating from a different generation, but he's forever linked to those two political personalities for me.
I mean, I was a Rush baby through and through, like so many others. And I remember one of the first times when I was starting to pay attention to what my parents had on the radio. It's just such a unique name. I asked my mom one time, is Rush Limbaugh really Russian? Because that's just such an odd name for, a little kid to hear. But yeah, it's really surreal, this conversation today. Because growing up as a Rush baby, I still remember, especially growing up in a rural setting, I still have memories of an analog world, very much so. And it was just Rush Limbaugh, and I'm sure there are other people, I'm sure there's a lot of people for whom this is true. Rush Limbaugh was like the sun coming up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Rush Limbaugh was like all of these things that you just take for granted in life. He was just there. And there are a couple of things, I'll just say this too. He was one of the first individuals outside of course, my parents, but one of the first individuals that I could call myself contemporaries with, we were alive at the same time, to inspire my worldview. The second person, or kind of the second and third people to do that would be you, Steve, and Glenn Beck, too. Because that was the first political book, Arguing with Idiots was the first political book that my parents got me.
Yeah.
And it's just the surreal nature of the conversation that we just had. I'm working for one of the people that helped shape my worldview on a platform built by the other person that helped shape my worldview.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool thing. But there are two things about Rush Limbaugh that really kind of stick out to me. And one of them I really wish that I could be better about. We can go on as many polemics as we would like to, and necessary polemics can rip out our spleen on a day-to-day basis, although in this era, it seems like that's less of a necessity. But Russia's just terminal optimism, that was what made him so fun to listen to. It's not like, and he never made it sound like he was blowing smoke up your keister. I mean, he was on the radio every day during the Obama administration. Those were some really, really terrifying times existentially for this country. But he was still there every single day. So his just terminal optimism was incredible. And that was one of the things that made him the way that he is. The other thing that stood out to me is Rush Limbaugh's explanation for why he rarely had guests on the show. And it wasn't until I was on this side of the microphone that I kind of reconsidered where he was coming for with his explanation. And his explanation was always, people don't tune in to this show to hear the guests. They tune in to hear me. And I always thought, oh boy, that's Rush's arrogance. That's the shtick. That's the shtick.
Yeah.
And now that I'm on the other side of the microphone, I want to say that was actually, that might have, maybe not, but that was more of a pressure for him, actually. That was a pressure that he felt. People want to hear me every day. And it's not that we always have guests on. Our motif on this show, our prerequisite, have guests on who can say something that nobody on the show can say. And I think we do a really good job of sticking to that. But it's an added pressure, especially with your one person. Every now and then, Mr. Snerdley would chime in, but it's just one person, 3 hours a day, just going toe to toe with an audience that you cannot see. That's just a level of talent, and to do that year in and year out, day in and day out, month in and month out, just a special talent that will never be replicated, I don't think, again. Just a special human being. So his terminal optimism, and then just the unique, and he will have imitators. He will have imitators for the rest of time, but I don't think anybody will ever be able to replicate one-to-one what he accomplished.
Very well said, Aaron. What about this particular interview and David and I's conversation maybe surprised you the most, Todd?
Well, at the end, how old is David, roughly?
I want to say 68, 70, I want to say.
I mean, I knew everything he said. It was authentic and heartfelt, but that raw emotion at the end, a brother's love, it's surprising. Not in I didn't see that coming, but it's a surprising in a way that God's joy often is. You know, the notion of gift, even in the face of loss, is, you know, I'll never forget that. I mean, most of the other stuff he talked about are things we knew because Rush was so popular and so ubiquitous for so long. But just that, the last thing I want to say is I'm going to let you hear my voice crack and tell you how much I love my brother and how proud I am. I mean, you just hope you have one relationship in your entire life that has level of meaning. If you are, you're a lucky man.
Amen to that. Todd? I'm sorry, Aaron.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. There was one thing that I didn't know. I didn't know that David actually negotiated Rush's, at least his first big-time contract.
I didn't know that either.
That's incredible. That's really cool. And that's something that I did not know previously. But I will say this, and this stuck out to me throughout the entire interview, just the affection that David showed for his brother. But definitely at the end. If you are an adult and you have adult siblings and you are on good terms with those siblings, you're a really, really lucky person. A really lucky person. Because I've seen it in extended family. I've seen it all over. There's so many broken families who don't want to have anything to do with the rest of their siblings, their parents. That's the broken world in which we live in. Okay, there's nothing unique necessarily, maybe, about this time in our world. But for him to have that level of affection for his brother and to have it all the way through and to be in that specific environment where his brother has stratospheric levels of success, audience, and wealth too, that's something else. That's beyond a blessing. That's kind of a miracle. And it's really cool to see that. It's really inspiring to see as well. Because when you have that level of success creep in to your family, you know, that's all well and good. But with that comes a lot of pitfalls, a lot of temptations, a lot of temptations to either be jealous, to try to take advantage of, you know, your sibling that's having more success, and to not let any of that creep in. That's a testament to their parents too, David and Rush's parents. But that's a really unique blessing, and I'm glad that David kind of let us look at that a little bit.
No doubt. Was this kind of as surreal for you guys as it was for me?
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, doesn't it feel like in another context, you're interviewing like George Washington's little brother? You know? I mean, and that level of figure, you know what I'm saying? Like,
well, it's surreal mostly because of the level of relationship and the respect between you and David. If it had just been, I've never met David in my life, I can't believe I got this interview, it might have felt a little, I mean, that was just like, you can't get closer to the real thing than what just happened. And that, again, it's a degree to which he lived with the real thing, warts and all. He grew up and saw it happen. He's very authentic in telling the story about, you know, where you could see the seeds planted from the very beginning. And so when he says things like, yeah, well, somebody told me about this Steve Deace guy, so instead of just blowing it off, it's like, let's hear, because I do know the real thing. And then he said, oh yeah, I've heard that before, and it was in my living. I mean, that's, you'll never, you've had a lot of good moments in your life. You'll have a lot of ones going forward. There's not one career-wise that's better than that compliment.
Maybe not. I didn't know that was coming, by the way. Yeah. But yeah, you might be right about that. Aaron, you get the last word.
Like I said, I just want to reset it. It is surreal for me to have spent 2 hours talking about the man who had kind of the first shot at shaping and informing my worldview working for the second guy who did that on the third guy, Glenn Beck's network, it is really, my head's kind of spinning right now. It's very surreal, and I can't wait to hear people's reactions to this. I think it'll be really cool. And having worked, well, it'll be a decade this year that I've worked for you. Certainly after I left Minnesota to come work for you, I just didn't have too much of a bandwidth for listening to other talk radio, not even Rush Limbaugh anymore. But as the years have passed, if nothing for nostalgia, and nostalgia can be a killer, but I do miss those days in high school. After football season was over, you get your schoolwork done, it's cold outside.
The music comes on.
The music comes on. Exactly. I do miss that.
We didn't even get into Rush's foray into late night TV as well. Remember, he had the late night TV talk show with Roger Ailes. That was tremendously successful.
Forgotten about ESPN.
I had forgotten about that too.
Brought that up.
ESPN brought him on as a football commentator. It went great for a couple of weeks, but the first chance they could to smear him as a racist, they did. But the temerity, the adversity, the perseverance. Imagine doing this while going deaf.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I hope you guys all got out of it as much as we did. Until the next time, Romans 8:28.